Right, so I had a little bit of an oops moment, which I wanted to actually use it as a teachable moment for you guys because it's very possible that this could happen to you. So I walked away from my pot I was letting it dry out at the end of the day, and then I forgot to cover it up. So this is what's going to happen to your bowl if you forget to take it off your molds. And this happened actually before it even got bone dry. It was sort of post leather hard when it broke right off the mold because that mold is not going to shrink and your pot is going to shrink. So that is something that could happen to you if you don't babysit it, which is exactly what happened to me. So I made another one and I really babysat it this time. So this is what state it's going to be in when it's ready to add things. So I double wrapped it. Once I realized it was in the perfect state, I didn't want it to dry anymore, so I took special care to wrap it a second time. And then I kind of flipped it over. So this is what it looked like before I wrapped it doubled up, right? So I had it like that. And this is just like the liner between this and the mold. So I pulled it down. And now I'm going to very, very gently sort of rotate my mold and kind of slide it out. Okay. So this is kind of the fun part because we get to see what it really looks like. It's kind of hard to see. And then when you pull your liner out, just be very gentle because when you did when we did the darting, there's a chance that you might have scored part of that plastic into the dart or something, and you don't want to break your piece. So just go slow. Okay. So this is the neat part of using a mold, is that you're going to have the impression of whatever you pressed your slab into. And it's holding its own, right? If I pick it up sideways, it doesn't flop over, but it is still bendable, right? I can still add things to it. It's the perfect state to continue to work on it. So the first thing I'm going to want to do, but very gently, right, because I don't want to warp the mold that I have, is I have to clean up the seams of the darts on the inside. Now they look really cool, but the only problem is that this is the inside of a functional vessel, and you don't want that bacteria to get into that seam and start to build up inside your pot. And it will definitely do that if you leave those seams like that. So there's a couple ways that you could really clean those up. You could just score them. I'm going to put my piece on this Lazy Susan here. And I'm going to put a piece of paper between. Always a good idea. I'm going to be very gentle with this. I don't want to bend it because I could break it. I could warp it. Clay has a memory, so sometimes if I were to push the walls in a little bit and then push them back out, it might remember that I did that because they're just particles right there that are laying on top of each other. So they could, when it dries and fires, they could lean in or out depending on which way I pushed it. So remember that your clay has a memory. Okay, so I could take a tool and I could just go in. It's soft enough that I could just kind of clean that up and then put the texture back in there. Or I could roll out a really thin coil and I could score it and just lay it in the seam. That's an option as well. I'm trying to think of the best option for closing that seam up. Probably the tiny wet coil. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to just take the needle tool. Fork is probably a little too big for this. And I'm going to go through and just score up that seam. And adding a little baby coil in there is a good idea too because you're sort of filling in that gap with a little extra clay. I'm anxious to see what forms you guys chose. And you might not have even started this yet, so today would be the day that you search your home for a mold and you roll out your slab and you make it. Now if you make your vessel today, you really have to babysit it because if you're not going to work on it again until we come back to class next week, there's a chance it could be way beyond dry. So my suggestion to you is if you're going to make your slump mold today, that I would just maybe try to keep it as wet as you can up until next Thursday. And maybe like Wednesday unwrap it and get it to the place that you want to get it, so that it's perfect for adding all of the embellishments we're going to add. So I'm just making a tiny, tiny little baby coil here. I don't want it to be too big, because then I have to do a lot of scraping away, and I don't need to do that. And because this clay is so wet, and I've scored it, and I'm going to add a little bit of water, I don't really need to score this coil. I don't feel the need to do that. Here, I'm going to step away for a sec. I forgot to grab some water. Alright, I'm going to take a little paintbrush and just quickly kind of sweep my brush up the seam here. And then because that coil is really tiny and wet, I'm just going to put it right in there and compress it into the seam. Pinch it off. As I press it, it's going to expand and get a little bit longer. So this is a stage when I start thinking about, well, what do I want my rim to look like? Remember, this is a functional object here, so you're not going to want these sharp edges, even though they look kind of cool. You're going to do some measurements and try to cut it off to get an even rim, and then we're going to add another coil to the rim so that our rim is a different shape and our vessel looks kind of finished off. Okay, so I've got all those little baby Band-Aid coils in there, and now I'm going to take a minute I could use a wooden scraper tool, I could use that plastic scraper that I gave you guys. I think I'm going to start with my finger, and then I'll go in and smooth. A little bit more control with my finger. Ceramics 1, your bowls have to be at least 6 inches across, and Ceramics 2, your bowl has to be 12 inches across, so bigger. So you have to go find a mold for something that's a little larger. So Ceramics 2, your bowls will probably be for serving something, you know, like a bowl of pasta or a big salad or something. Bowl of popcorn. I have a pretty great popcorn bowl that a friend of mine made in grad school. He made these gigantic bowls all the time. You just sit there and throw bowls all day. And then he would wood fire them. So they're all kind of smoky looking, and I just have the perfect popcorn bowl from him. All right, so I'm going to take my scraper tool and I'm just going to clean that up. And then I'll want to get in there with a little texture so that that seam is not obvious. I've got my hand on the other side for counter pressure because I'm trying my best not to warp my mold here. I could take a sponge and just wring it out and kind of lightly go over that area too. Just trying to disguise the fact that I just repaired it. All right, and then I'm going to take, I don't know if I could fit the toe of my boot in there, but I'm going to try. Again, I'm keeping my hand on the other side so that I'm not pressing out too much. I can really only get the texture on the rim here, so I'm going to have to go in with, I think I used the other side of this scraper. So I'm going to do a little bit of work there. Not too deep, just enough to disguise it, make it look like part of the pattern. Maybe smooth it out with my hand a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to measure from the table up, and I'm going to make a mark. Probably have to choose the lowest point to cut off here. So that would probably be right about here. So I could just take my finger and, like, I know you guys don't have a Lazy Susan, but this will be a sort of a guide to the lowest point, and then I'll go through and measure. My arm is kind of locked in at my waist here, so my finger's not moving. I'll pick a spot. Okay, this roller is so old and faded. Here we go. And I'm going to just go around and I'm going to mark it wherever I hit that mark there on the ruler. And this is going to be my guide as to where to cut it off. Okay, I'm going to go back and draw that line again. All right, then I'm going to take a needle tool or a knife tool, whatever you have that's sharp. And you guys won't have a Lazy Susan, so you're just going to have to kind of walk around your piece. But I'm going to just very carefully slice it off. Okay, there we go. So now we can really get a sense of, oh, how good did I roll the slab out, right? Like, this is thinner in some areas and thicker in others. So this is your opportunity to do a little bit of repair work. So I'm going to go through just with my fingers and kind of pinch that sharp edge down. This is not going to be the edge of my bowl. I want the edge of my bowl to be softer. So I'm going to add a coil to it. You could also flare this out a little bit and round this off if you wanted to. You can see right now it's a sharp edge and it's just not very finished looking. So we want it to look more finished. So I'm going to show you how to attach a coil to this. I think before I do that, I'm going to just do a little pinch and a flare all the way around. If you don't have a Lazy Susan, you could just spin your board. Being very consistent. Okay, so it already looks better just by flaring that out. It looks a little bit more finished, but I want it to look even more finished. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to score this edge. And I'm going to add a little bit more clay to it. This is a pretty fancy looking bowl here, so I'm not 100% sure I would use it for something as simple as cereal, or I might use it to serve something pretty like a bowl of fruit salad or bowl of pasta or something I'm trying to present and serve. Okay, so this is just dry and it's not going to be useful, so you can just toss that. Right, I'm going to roll out a very even coil. The more even I can get this coil, before I attach it, the less work I'm going to have when I actually have to clean it up. You guys will be posting a whip of your piece today, so hopefully you are working alongside me. In whatever stage you are with this, I think most of you are probably just starting it because you probably just watched my demo last week, and that's fine. I do want to see some progress today though. All right, we're going to wedge this up really good. This is nice fresh clay. It's always a good idea to start off with a uniform shape before you start to roll your coil. So I usually just kind of pinch it into a uniform shape before I even start. And I want to make it longer than I need it so that I don't run out. Another quick demo on how to roll a nice little coil here. Spread your fingers out. You want to roll from the tip of your finger to your wrist, and it's intuitive, right? Wherever you feel it's thickest, that's where you're going to put the pressure. So you can see my hands are kind of moving around. Even mid-roll, I might move my hand down to an area that feels a little thicker. This just takes practice, and I'm not pushing on it too hard. If I push too hard, then my coil is going to end up being more geometric. Of course, you need a smooth surface to do this. And this is where you decide, make some aesthetic choices. You know, how thick do I want my rim? And should it match? It should match my bowl. My bowl is pretty, you know, hefty looking, so I think my rim can be kind of hefty. So I'm getting to the point where I could probably pinch some of this off because I want it to be thinner than this. And it's getting really long. Before you pinch it off though, make sure you haven't, you know, that you measure it, right? It's almost the perfect length right now, but it just really depends on like how skinny I want it to be. I'm probably going to make it thicker than I really want my rim because I'm going to be scraping away at it and kind of shaping it once it's on there. So I need a little extra clay to do that. So doing these demos is really fun for me because most of the time I know I'm teaching you a certain technique, but I'm just being creative in front of you. I'm kind of winging it. Like I didn't plan this out. This is just happening based on like my aesthetic intuition while I'm teaching you guys. And you know, that's kind of fun. So half the time I don't really have a plan unless I've done a sketch or something as to what I'm going to be showing you other than the technique. Like I know the technique is slump mold bowl, but it's just kind of happening before your eyes here. This is a very long coil. This is like 2.5 feet long. So it took me some time and patience to actually roll that out. So I'm going to pinch off the end here, and then I'm going to score it. And you could take a fork for this since it's so long. And it's kind of thick. Crisscross. Definitely need water for this because this is drier than this. I might even use my little sponge here. Saturate this pretty good. I'm going to recommend too that you score a little bit beyond what you think you need because we're going to be smoothing this clay that we're adding onto it. So it might be a good idea to have some scoring in the areas that we could spread that clay. Okay, so this is the part we need to do slowly and carefully. I want to pinch it on the same way every time I pinch. Okay, so get it in the right spot, and then I'm just pinching at the base because I don't want this top part to be pinched. And then of course I have to make sure that that coil is in the right place and kind of lined up with my scoring. This is going to take a little patience here. Of course it's wet clay, so we can move it, but we want to put it in the right spot to begin with. Once you get the hang of it, you can go a little faster. I promise you, these little details really make or break your vessel. And these are the things, and now that we're in semester 2, these are the things I'm going to expect from your pieces. More refinement, more attention, a slower working. All right, so now I'm at the end of my coil here, and I need to score it because I'm going to attach it to this end. Maybe put a little water in there. And really compress. This is an area that could open up in a crack. So we want to make sure it's nice and attached. Okay, so now I have this kind of lumpy coil on the rim here. And it's lumpy on both sides, but I'm going to do some finishing work on it. So I'm going to go through and compress it one more time. Really make sure it's sealed nicely all around the edge. Close that seam up, compress. You can see how I try to do the same motion and gesture as I work my way around the pot. I wish I could buy a Lazy Susan for everybody, but these are very expensive. This is a $90 item right here. You can buy cheaper ones. There's like plastic. Here, I'll show you this one. You can buy like Lazy Susans that were meant for the kitchen, just to put food on that's, spin. This is a really, really old one. Obviously, it's got a crack in it, but it's just plastic. Very cheap, but very handy in ceramics. Okay, so now that I've got it compressed on there, I'm going to spend a little time with either my finger or a wooden tool. I'm really going to close that seam. So I've got my hand on the other side so I'm not flaring it out. And I like to go in a crisscross when I'm attaching. So I'm sweeping it at a diagonal here, and then I'll go back in the other direction on both sides. Okay, and then this is the tricky part. And go back the other direction. This is the same concept as rolling out a slab, right? The more directions you push those clay particles, the less likely they're going to warp in one direction. Kind of scraping it too. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the outside edge. And on the inside. I don't want this seam to open up on me later when it's drying or firing. So I'll have to have a technique. Say if I do this technique to it, I know it's not going to crack open. A lot of ceramic artists develop these techniques that are, with the clay body they're using are surefire for them, so they know. That was a secret pun that just happened. Sometimes that happens. I don't even realize I'm doing it. Okay, going the other direction, crisscross. It's kind of a neat texture. You could sort of use that texture if you liked it. It's kind of like a crisscrossy texture. Come on, webcam. Focus, focus. All right, now here's another trick. You're making a vessel and you want that rim to be even. Not there yet, right? So I can take a board or something that is even and I can put it on top. And I'm not pushing hard on it, right? I don't want it to like break my piece, but I can just put it on top and like rotate it around and see where the gaps are, or where I need to kind of maybe just tap on it. Certain areas. So now it's a little bit more level. You could even get meticulous about it and put a level on top of the board, but we're not going to go there. Okay, so now I need to do some cleaning up. This is the part that I want to see you guys really working on this semester, is cleaning up. So I'm taking my rib tool and I'm really closing up that seam as if it never existed. You guys still here with me? I need to see evidence of your existence here. Someone say, I'm here, or in the chat, just say, I'm listening.
I'm here.
Thank you. I'll tell you, this is one of the weirdest experiences of my teaching career, is teaching to a bunch of cameras that are off. And I'm just like hoping that you guys are listening. Are you there? Am I teaching into the void, or are you here? I kind of like that texture on the outside, so I'm not going to scrape it completely because it kind of goes with the rest of it. I might disguise it a bit so it looks like it melts into the other texture, but it's kind of fun. And I'll probably put a little bit of boot texture on that too. Remember, the outside can have more texture because it's not going to be holding your food. So now we have to really pay attention to details here, because this is your only opportunity really to refine your piece, because at this point it's going to start to dry out. And then once it does, you can't shape it anymore. It's done with its form. You're done forming it at that point. So now I'm disguising that rim with a texture, making it look like the rest of the interior. I might even drop in a couple more textures. Just okay, so now the rim still needs some work. It looks bumpy to me and lumpy, so I'm going to refine it even more. So I'm going to just pinch it, and this is where I need to be really conscious of like the thickness that I'm making it, because I want it to be the same all the way around. Kind of flaring it out as I pinch. And then these are the types of things you'll get as you work with clay over the years. You're going to get better at these things, and you'll be able to refine your pieces more, because you'll just kind of know intuitively how to do it. So it's my job to kind of like, in a sense, assign you certain techniques, because once you experience them, then the next time you make a piece, you're like, oh, I remember doing this to that other piece, and that worked really well, and I'm going to try that on this piece, and I know how to do it now. So that's why when I assign you guys these specific things, like you have to make your mug out of a slab, it's because I'm trying to teach you a technique that will help you, for the next assignment, or for in the future when you're working with clay. Our spring exhibition. We haven't come up with a solid title yet, but it's going to be called either Message in a Bottle or making a time capsule. I'm making a time capsule out of clay. So I'm trying to teach you these vessel forms so that when you get to the point where you're going to make your bottle or your vessel, you have some techniques to pull from. All right, so this is where the webcam is really handy because I can see whether or not my rim is really round, like where I need to pull it in and push it out. And then I also want you to drop down and look at it from the silhouette side, from the side, to see if this side is the same as this side. All these little details are really important when you're dealing with symmetry and vessel making. It's getting close. So when I pinched it out, I lost some of my texture here. So I might want the rim to be smooth and then the texture to start right under the rim. That might be a nice little detail I can add. So the next step is to consider, finishing touches. Do I need an extra foot, or do I like the way this foot looks here? Another way you can deal with a straight rim is by putting your vessel upside down. And if there are parts that are not touching the table, then you know those are not level with the parts that are touching the table. So it seems like there's a little bit of a problem here where it got dipped. So I'm going to flip this over and I'll maybe pinch this up a little bit. So this is a cumulative class, and so what that means for you and for me as a teacher is that everything you make from here on out, I need to see evidence of what you've learned all year. So, and I'm going to get more particular about your technique, right? So when I'm grading you and looking at the work you're doing, I'm looking for evidence that you have learned something from this year with the other techniques. And that you're putting a little extra work and time into your pieces and you're refining them and you're getting better at working with clay. Okay, so I feel like that rim is good. I might let it dry a little bit and then I'll probably go over it a couple times with a little bit more smoothing and texture, refining before it gets way beyond sculpting. So adding a foot. Do I want to add feet? Well, the answer to that question is up to you. I would consider this to be enough of a foot because it dips in a little bit. You can see it more on the inside. It's flat on the edge here, so it won't rock. But if you wanted to get creative and add an extra foot to your piece, let's use this little extra slab here of foil to create a foot. And my suggestion to you with a bowl that's functional is to not make your foot really huge and clunky and lumpy and like crazy big, because it's just going to make your bowl heavy and clunky. So I'm going to make a pretty small foot, and it's just going to elevate my piece up off the table, which makes it look more elegant. Okay, so I'm going to take a little tiny rolling pin, but you can use a big one, and I'm just going to roll this kind of flat. I'd use a cup for this. A glass cup or a plastic cup would work fine. And then I'm going to take my ruler and a needle tool. my elusive needle tool that like disappears on me every time I put it down. And I'm going to actually slice this straight. So if I do this, it's going to be easier when I clean it up to make it look good. I'm going to do it on both sides. Clay is a very, very slow art form. It takes patience and time. Can't really be rushed. Can't really be forgotten about. It's very, very needy art form, which is probably partly why I love it, right? Because it calls you back constantly to tend to it. So it makes you work more, makes you focus more on the art. But you have to, in order to make something, you have to tend to it. Okay, so this is the tricky part. Like, where do I put that foot? I need to make sure it's in the middle. So I might want to do some measurements here. You know, my bowl isn't perfectly round or perfectly anything. But it might help if I do a little bit of measuring so that I can put it in the center as much as I can. You can also use, if you have a Lazy Susan or something that spins, you can put your needle tool down, and this is what you would do on the potter's wheel if you were carving your foot to get it in the middle. Let me look at my, that's way off. So you just erase it. This webcam is very handy for these things. So I'd have to put it on the floor. I'm going to do just a little tiny paddle here. Not too much because I don't want to ruin my form, but this is going to help me find the foot placement. Okay, I'll take my fork. You can put handles on your bowl too if you want. It's not a requirement. I'm not going to give you mark you down on points if you don't, because most bowls don't have handles, so it's just like it's only if you want to. All right, and I'm going to score up this bottom part. This coil is now sort of like a geometric rectangle because I use the ruler to make straight edges. Good. I really need to figure out where I'm putting this here. I want it to sit in from this side. You don't want your foot to be too far out this way or too far in this way. You want it to be kind of like right there. Okay, now I'm just going to compress it. I'm not going to stick it too hard yet because I want to make sure it's in the right spot. Or cut it off yet. I'm not sure. I'll cut it off longer than I need it till I'm ready. Now this part you have to be careful because I don't know how soft this is for you. It shouldn't be too soft because your piece is been drying, but you don't want to push too hard on this because it could collapse in. Okay, so now that I have it where I want it, relatively, I'm going to take a tool or my finger and I'm going to really attach it. So I can't just like stick it on there with a score and think that it's going to stay on there. You really have to make that foot part of your piece. So I'm scraping down the outside edge with my tool here. Counter pressure with my other finger. See, these are the things I don't even think about anymore. They just become part of my motions when I'm working with clay. Counter pressure is always something I do. You guys might have to remind yourself to do it, but eventually you will just do it, like riding a bike. Okay, I'm going to go on the inside. The inside also needs to be sealed. This is the part where you have to be careful about how hard you press. You know, ceramics happens in stages. You attach when it's wet, you clean it up when it's a little bit drier. Then I'm going to go through and just scrape, kind of get rid of that texture with my tool here. I'm going to do the same for the outside edge here. See here why a Lazy Susan is a really nice thing to have. Okay, and then because this is not expecting this to be perfect, I'm just going to use my sponge to clean up those sharp edges. You don't want your foot to have sharp edges because they could scrape up the table after it's fired. Get rid of that crisscross in the middle. That's where I'm going to put my signature. I'll do that later when this is leather hard. So when I glaze, now I can glaze. This is another advantage of having a foot, is that I can glaze up to the foot. Whereas before I'd probably have to stop my glaze here and then I'd have this weird like non-glazed area. But because I have this foot elevating it, I can let the glaze kind of slip down and stop in that crack. But you don't want to put glaze on the inside here. So this is not going to be glazed and the top of your foot's not going to be glazed. But the glaze will probably kind of melt a little bit down onto the front of your foot. Okay, so this is pretty wet still, so I don't necessarily want to flip it over and put it on the table because I'm just going to squish it. So I'll let it set up for a little bit and then I'll probably flip it over and let it rock a bit on the table and make sure it's nice and flat, right? I don't want my foot to make my pot wobble on the table, but I can't do it yet because I will squish it. All right, so that is all you need to do for your bowl. If you're ready to let it start drying, make sure you haven't warped it or pushed on it or flared out the rim or anything. In fact, I might just look. I'm going to let it dry out a bit upside down. I don't want to warp it. And then I'll do some more finishing up, cleaning up once it gets to be more leather hard. I might even retexturize or scrape or wipe down or clean up certain things. Okay, so that is the bowl with the foot and the rim with texture. Any questions? All right, I'm going to go wash my hands and I will be right back. Thank you guys for chiming in. I appreciate it. All right, it's 11:24. Now would be a good time for you guys to wrap up your work, or take a photo of it, wrap up your work, and post your WIP. There's about 10 minutes left of class.